Well, thank you for that question. It's an issue that I've worked on with AARP for the last year or so, and as your treasurer for the last 6 years, it's been an area that we've been investigating. How do we put a voluntary payroll deduction plan in place that isn't a burden to small employers and is actually beneficial to the employees over time? We've set up a program with the Wyoming legislature this year to talk about how we can improve those programs, and we're investigating lots of different options. What I would commit to do is continue that discussion, because I think it's important for economic diversification. It's important that we meet one of the nation's most pressing concerns of not having enough retirement savings, and of facilitating a better approach to accruing those retirement savings over time. So as your governor, I would work with the treasurer and the retirement board and AARP to continue the efforts with the Wyoming legislature to identify programs that could be helpful in improving retirement savings.
You know, it is a national problem, and from the data I've seen, it appears that Wyoming is not any worse, or not dramatically worse than most of the rest of the country. I think one thing we need to do as a state is deal with our overwhelmingly expensive healthcare system and make sure people have adequate access to healthcare insurance that's affordable. That would free up more disposable income for them to consider savings. We need to encourage payroll deduction. A lot of these matters with 401ks and how it plays into the federal tax code are controlled at the federal level. So I would certainly want to work with our congressional delegation to increase savings across the board. And I look forward to the report of the legislature on retirement security. Well, I think until we have access to broader arrays of services, whether that's through broadband in rural areas or better cell coverage than we have in the state of Wyoming, I can tell you, having driven across the state, that we don't have the best cell coverage in this state. So we have to continue to rely on landlines, which means in a lot of our rural communities, we cannot deregulate them. We would have to continue to guarantee service, and I would certainly want to work with our providers to make sure that we can deregulate in the cities, but not in the rural areas. I think, again, we need to expand broadband and make sure that it's available across the board and in rural communities. We need to look into our 911 coverage and also make sure that we have all of those public safety features in place, not just for our rural citizens, but for everyone in Wyoming.
Well, Wyoming benefits currently from having a pretty robust wired network. And in this rural community where sometimes it's difficult to get cell phone coverage, which we hope will improve as those services are built out, it's important that we maintain that wired service so that seniors, veterans, and others can access phones reliably and understandably. And so I think it's important that we maintain that wired system. I would work as the governor to make sure that the transition we have to these newer technologies makes sense. I myself had a recent experience with my father who was unable to understand exactly how to use his cell phone, but because he had a familiarity with the wired phone service, he was able to get through to us. It's important that we have that service. You know, as Wyoming's population ages, I think it's important to remember that having a healthy home, having a home that you can stay in, and having the services like Wyoming Senior Home Health and other services like that are incredibly important. As governor, I think it's helpful that the governor can help set those priorities. And as governor, I would help set the priorities to make sure that we support home health, that we support senior centers, as these are important for nutritional needs. They're important for services such as being able to fill out paperwork, and they're important as social gathering centers. I think as Wyoming enters this next several years, as our population ages, it is critical that we make sure that these services are well supported, and I will actually do my best to make sure that happens.
Well, of course, Wyoming has to take on its revenue challenges and look for revenue to support all of our basic government services. The last year I was in the legislature, I thought we made a lot of penny-wise and pound-foolish decisions by not funding home-based care. We could also restore senior dental care, which would help the overall health of many of our seniors. But with a looming projected costs of $186 million to $312 million a year in nursing home costs for the state, we simply cannot afford to not keep our seniors in their homes longer. I've been in senior citizen centers across the state, and they provide invaluable services, but they cobble together their funding from a mishmash of sources, and we need to make sure that those services are available across the state so we can keep seniors in their homes. Well, the first thing we have to do, of course, is make sure we have broadband across the state. Our larger communities have access to adequate broadband and connectivity, but that is not true across the state. There is also federally available telehealth money that Wyoming's been leaving on the table, and we need to make sure that we're accessing all of that money, looking to the Universal Service Fund, which we all pay into. It's designed to help rural communities, and we need to take advantage of that money. And then, of course, make sure that when you're at home, you have access to that telehealth opportunity so you can reach out to your providers rather than transporting your loved one who's probably weak to a healthcare provider. I think telehealth could assist in that.
Well, I believe Wyoming is remarkably situated to sort of help lead this telehealth revolution we're going to see. And I say that because medicine is moving out of the hospitals into the homes. We know that that's where the best care can be given. We need to make sure that care is understandable, that the interface with the telehealth features are understandable, and that they're navigable, because as people age, they need to be able to communicate in a reliable and understandable way. Plus, as we have seen in my family's case, if somebody is dehydrated, if there are other issues that are associated with it, we need to make sure that this technology is responsive to people as they go forward. So what I would say is this is an area where Wyoming can lead the way. I would work with all the hospitals to make sure that our telehealth not only leads the nation, but is accessible and makes sense to our seniors. You know, as Wyoming goes forward, we're accustomed to this boom and bust cycle, and we have just recently experienced something of a bust. We're starting to see a little bit of a recovery, and so Wyoming is in a pretty good situation. What I'd say as treasurer over the last several years is we've done our best to be able to improve returns to help augment any shortfalls we'd see on our mineral side. This is important because roughly anywhere from the second or the third largest input into our revenue stream comes from our investments at this point. I would continue to support the Treasurer's Office to make sure that happens. From a budgetary standpoint, I think it is incredibly important that Wyoming have a good sense of priorities. And our seniors and our people of age 50 and over are a priority and absolutely have made this state, and I will go to bat for them daily.
Well, I'd like to change the question a little bit just to emphasize that the first thing we need to do in Wyoming is acknowledge that we cannot continue as a boom and bust state. And that means we have to take a long, hard look at how we generate revenue in the state so that we have enough revenue for all necessary government services, including for people over the age of 50. We cannot continue to rely nearly exclusively on coal, oil, and natural gas to fund our state government. And I've really been clear on that from the beginning. But for people over 50, one of the most important things the state needs to do, and it should have done 4 or 5 years ago, is to expand Medicaid. I can't tell you how many people I have met across the state who are working or who have had jobs and no longer have health insurance and they're over 50. And speaking from personal experience as a cancer survivor, being over 50 is the worst time in your life to not have access to regular health care.